Today, I want to touch on a relatively sensitive topic and one that I really hope I don't have to talk with most of our families about, and that is student discipline. Again, hope I don't have to talk about it, but we all know that teenagers sometimes make bad decisions, and sometimes there are consequences associated with those decisions. And sometimes that means those may come up in the college application process. It is very rare, but every so often I do have a student who has to ask me, what do I do about this? Fill in the blank with whatever the incident might be that we have to discuss. So let me break it down in various ways today, because as with everything in this process, so much is dependent upon the student's high school, how they handle the repercussions for different types of discipline issues, and even to a certain extent, how does the university that they are applying to manage those kinds of issues. So let's first start with what I consider the four major categories of issues that could be encountered. The most egregious would be obviously, maybe not obviously, but would be criminal charges of some sort. Colleges are going to ask about that most of the time on their applications in terms of, have you been convicted? Do you have charges pending against you? Anything beyond typically a minor traffic violation is what they're looking for. The other types that are typically more related to school-based discipline would be things like academic dishonesty. Has a student been caught plagiarizing, cheating off of another student, using AI if it wasn't explicitly allowed in a particular assignment or something like that? The other type that is probably the most common, other than academic dishonesty, that I've dealt with over my years is something related to either alcohol or substance abuse, making a bad choice about maybe showing up to a football game under the influence or having it in your car on campus, those kinds of things. And then the other one would just be what I consider sort of basic misconduct. Did you skip lunch period and go off campus when you didn't have permission to do so? Those kinds of things that are typically a little less egregious, but still could be things that are taken seriously by their high school, depending upon how that is handled. So let's walk through, first of all, why do we think colleges even ask this question? Well, the basic reason is literally because they care about safety and security on their campus. So they want to know who is applying and what background might be coming with them in terms of especially criminal activity. And again, this is pretty rare, especially, but if that were to happen, clearly that is a big factor for most colleges to take into consideration. I'm not saying that it would completely keep a student out, because I think it would probably be somewhat dependent upon the violation and the outcomes that were handed down and those kinds of things. I have not personally dealt with that directly. The closest I've come to that was when I still worked in schools. A party was broken up and students were given citations by the police because they were underage drinking, but that did not become a major issue in terms of really heavy duty problems. The other types are, again, academic dishonesty. That one is probably the one I have seen happen the most often in my career, in terms of, again, cheating on a test, plagiarizing a paper, and in this day and age, using AI inappropriately. And I would tell you that the way colleges deal with that will probably vary based on a couple of things. One is the age of the student when it happens. Actually, I would apply this to all of the rest of the three categories, actually. What age did this happen? So for example, if it was academic dishonesty, an alcohol violation, or simple goofiness, as I like to call it sometimes when it comes to the misconduct, making bad decisions. If it happened relatively early in a student's high school career, 9th or 10th grade, and it's the only thing that happened throughout their high school career, then chances are a college is going to let the student explain the circumstances and explain what happened, and in many cases be able to move on beyond that. Where it becomes far more serious is anything that is habitual. It happens more than once, and especially anything that happens late in the high school process, particularly senior year. They are looking at students coming into their senior year as hopefully college ready. And so again, do college students make mistakes? Absolutely. But they are hoping that the decision-making process has evolved a little bit by the time students get to their senior year. And so the later it gets in high school, or again, if it is repeated behavior, those are going to be the types of situations that colleges are going to take much more seriously. But here's the other caveat. Colleges don't all ask the same questions on their applications about discipline related issues. For example, I was just prior to hopping on this video doing a little research to see what kinds of questions are out there this year on the college specific sections of the Common Application. I came across one university doesn't ask a thing about it, no question at all about even criminal behavior. So nothing is being asked about any kind of background related to discipline or issues related to that. Another school, literally their question, they go through a series of questions about criminal charges. Do you have any criminal charges pending against you? But then, have you ever withdrawn from or left a high school, college, or university with any pending disciplinary sanction, charge, hearing, or investigation related to your conduct? Have you ever been expelled, dismissed, suspended, placed on probation, or otherwise subject to any disciplinary sanction by any school, college, or university? So they are getting even more specific at this particular college, asking, again, did the student leave while something was unresolved that was sort of pending against them? And again, second question is directly, have you been expelled, dismissed, suspended, placed on probation, or otherwise subject to any disciplinary sanction? And I think this one is the most broad and it digs in the deepest of the types of questions that we encounter. So essentially, if you've been in trouble, this college is expecting that you are going to talk about it, because any type of sanction really means, did anything happen? So I think that's one where it would be clear that a student is going to have to own up to anything that they got in trouble with at school. Backing up a step from that, some colleges ask that similar type question, but stop at, have you ever been suspended? Or have you ever been suspended or put on probation? And probation can apply to academic probation as well in some schools' minds, depending on how they phrase their question. But again, dismissed, expelled, suspended, those are clearly really heavy-duty sanctions, and that may be where a college stops in what they're most concerned with. But this college particularly goes on to say any type of disciplinary action. So what I tell students, if this is the case for them, we're going to be honest. And every time this question is asked, for example, if I'm literally was to fill out my Common Application right now and say yes to that question, that yes, I've had some type of discipline against me in high school, the next thing that happens is a text box opens up and they ask you to explain yourself. So through the years, I have coached students through what to do in this situation. And basically, you own up to it. You've already been caught, found guilty, so to speak. So tell the story about what happened, explain what you've learned from that situation, and own the fact that you made a mistake. And that is really what the best we can do in this situation, because again, it is something that did happen. You want to be honest on the application, and you want to really, again, get to the other side of it and say, from this, I learned this, this, and this. And hopefully the result is also nothing else has happened since then. And you're able to state that in this process as well. And then we all assume that we're moving forward in a positive direction then. Inevitably, I will get a student or even their parent who might say, do we have to report this? Well, here's something to consider. Depending on the school you attend and their policy, they may be reporting it on your behalf, whether you know it or not. So my suggestion is, if you've been in this situation, you need to get real clear about what your high school is doing on their end, because counselors are oftentimes asked questions about student behavior and things like this when they're filling out forms or simply responding to questions from colleges. Having said that, the answer is still yes, you should report it. If you are being directly asked a question by a college and you intentionally don't reveal the truth, then that's another level of academic dishonesty, quite frankly. So you never want to take the chance of that being found out in any kind of way. So again, if you are in this situation, if you're the parent of a student in this situation, get real clear about what the school is going to report, and then make sure you're reviewing what are the questions that are being asked on the college's supplements about this kind of behavior, so that you know how you're going to approach it and what you need to share and how you're going to write an amazing essay. It's really less than an essay. It's not 650 words, but a response to what happened, so that there's evidence that this was just a dumb mistake and teenagers make them, and I'm going to move on from it, or I have moved on from it. Now, then the follow-up question often is this going to impact admissions? Again, for more minor things that happened early in high school, student learned their lesson, hasn't been in trouble again, it's much less likely to do so. Having said that, you don't want to add anything to this process that gives a college a reason to say, I've got student A over here who has none of this on their background or their record, and student B over here, similar type students academically, extracurricularly, all of those kinds of things, but we've got this other thing that now we have to consider. So don't put yourself in a situation where that might be even called into question and leave a university having to make a decision. The other thing that I will tell you that I've experienced is at times, once a student answers that they've had some type of disciplinary issue related to school, usually, again, in this case, more likely an alcohol violation or some kind of just general misconduct, sometimes the admissions office then has to process their response that the student has written through somebody like the Dean of Students office, another body on campus who is really reviewing it, again, going back to that basic tenet of because of campus safety and security. So whoever is sort of tasked with that in their office may be called upon to review what a student has written, and may have a committee that is then looking at it to say, okay, this student we're going to say is okay and cleared and continue back through the admissions process. So it's not always just the admissions office standing alone even making this decision. At times, there are people from the Department of Student Affairs involved in it as well, who are looking at the circumstances and then telling the admissions staff what the decision is going to be when it comes to that. So again, it's not always the end of the world. I'm a parent. I have watched my child make mistakes growing up. I think that's part of growing up. They don't learn if they don't make some of these mistakes, but we want to really keep in mind that during this process, and especially the later it gets into high school, the more serious it could become. And we just want to really impart to them, this is not the type of mistake you want to have to even deal with going through the application cycle. Again, they do it, they make mistakes, many of them land on their feet, and there's really very little repercussion except for the stress of going through this in the process. So certainly not condoning that behavior, but I just want to also give that reassurance that there are times when the mistake happens and it's a blip and that's all it is. But as parents, we want to encourage them to make those good decisions. And one more time, especially in senior year, the worst situation probably that I've watched unfold is, and I've done this more than once, is watching something happen at senior prom and bad decisions get made, students get in trouble. And at that point, you've already been admitted to college, and that can still impact the ultimate decision. A college could even rescind an offer if it was something so egregious that they felt like you couldn't be a member of their community after that. So behavior, drilling at home, helping them make those good decisions is really important so that we don't even have to meddle in all of this during the college application process. Of course, it always depends. There's so many questions out there, and we're here to help. We'd love to talk to you if you have anything on your mind related to the college admission process. And until next time, take care.